today's Transcendent Community Concussions Talk session. You're in for a real treat today, and I'm so glad that you're here to join us for our very first Transcendent Community Concussions Talk session. So before I pass it along to our fantastic moderator today, Daniela Testani, I want to share a few words of thanks because we always run out of time for these, and it's really important to thank everyone who's been a part of this amazing event. First, a very sincere thank you to our incredible panel of speakers today, which you will hear from soon. We are so grateful for the work that they all do and the efforts made to share their stories with us today. So thank you so very much. Also, a big thank you to our amazing Transcendent KT team for making today possible. Our full Transcendent team, led by Dr. Roger Zemek at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, our industry partner, 360 Concussion Care, and of course, the Ontario Brain Institute for supporting Transcendent and always championing meaningful knowledge translation and engagement. Finally, a big thank you to each of you for carving out time today to join us and to learn together. I truly hope you enjoyed today's session and that we see you again for more Transcendent Community Concussion Talks in the future. I will now pass it along to our fantastic moderator for today and a Transcendent KT team member, Daniela Testani. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that warm welcome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our first Community Concussion Talks. We designed these series to be pretty strategic to engage the community on critical topics involving concussion and creating a space to hear from people with lived experience as well as experts in the field. So we're excited today to share with you our first session today. It's quite timely. As you may or may not know, November is Intimate Partner Violence Awareness Month. And so we thought this would be a great and meaningful way to bring together the intersection of intimate partner violence as well as concussion through lived experience as well as expertise. And so by that, we are connecting perspectives. So here's a brief agenda of what we'll be discussing today. So we have 3 pre-recorded sessions for you, followed by a live question and answer session. You'll be hearing from Becky, who is a lived experience advocate, Karen Mason and Dr. Paul Van Donkelaar, who are from the SOAR project at the University of British Columbia, and Dr. Jennifer Dawson, one of our own Transcendent members, who will be speaking to the Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion. And before we start off today, we want to share with you a brief land acknowledgement. Now, we know that we have people joining from all over Canada, actually, but most of our KT team here at Transcendent is at the University of Toronto. And so we'd like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates, but Nick will be popping in the chat a link for you to look up your own land acknowledgement based on your address for you to take that time, as well as some resources for you to learn and take action as well. So for thousands of years, this land has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this land. This is a brief disclaimer that we've provided for you today. So as you know, and may already have guessed that the content in today's session may be emotionally challenging to listen to. In particular, Becky will be sharing her story with us, which does have some language that can be quite triggering for some audiences. And so her recording is around 24 minutes long. If you feel the need to leave and come back, please do so. If you feel uncomfortable, or please feel free to take a break and make sure to listen to yourself during this time, as well as some of the content today may be a bit difficult to listen to. So please check in and step away as you need. And with that, I will introduce our first speaker. So Becky is a person with lived intimate partner violence and concussion experience. She's also a huge advocate. We are so grateful to have her with us today. So we pre-recorded her session a little bit ago. And to protect Becky's privacy, she's asked to keep her camera off, which there is no problem. So during the recording today, you'll see images of nature as she's speaking, along with closed captioning. So just to keep that in mind while you're listening to her story. So with that, I will start her recording. So Becky, it's so nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm wondering if we could maybe start off by sharing your story with the listeners.
Yeah, so I have been in a relationship for about 13 years. It was not the best relationship in the world. I wouldn't say I had gotten to the point where I was ready to leave the relationship and was slowly kind of realizing that a lot of what had been going on was abusive. And as I started kind of voicing my desire to get out, it kind of the violence and stuff kind of started to increase and stuff. And there were a few different incidents, but the worst was at the end of March in 2018. One Monday evening, my ex he threw me down on the floor when he was upset about about whatever. Anyway, he'd thrown me on the floor. He sat on top of me, held me down on the floor, and started just punching me closed fist on one side of my head repeatedly, and the other side hitting the floor. And then he grabbed my hair and he would slam my head on the floor a few times, and then he grabbed me by the hair and got up. But because he had me by the hair, he kind of compelled me to follow him down the hallway where he threw me down on the ground in the kitchen, which had hardwood flooring. And then he pinned me on the ground again, and just several more punches to the side of the head with the other side hitting the floor, and then again with the grabbing my hair and slamming my head in the ground. And to say the least, I think I sustained easily 15 to 20 blows that night. There was certainly, I certainly can remember lying on that kitchen floor and seeing the dishwasher, and there was definitely a moment there where I didn't think, like, he wasn't stopping. I didn't think I was going to make it. And I thought of my daughter in her bedroom right above the kitchen. And he finally moved his hands to my neck and started pinching. He's like, "Oh, you're not going to call the police. You're not going to call the police, are you?" And I made all sorts of promises that I wouldn't. And he finally shifted his weight enough that I could wiggle out. And at that point, I felt nothing. I was just like, "Get the hell out! Get the hell out!" I got up. I ran upstairs. It was the middle of the night. I grabbed my daughter, who was a toddler at the time. She was just a few days before her third birthday, and I picked her up and ran back downstairs. Had to get my glasses that were now broken from the floor in the family room, and my purse. I ran out the door, and he was following me the whole time. But I think as soon as I had my daughter in my arms, he he just kind of wouldn't be more than 6 inches away from me, but he didn't touch me. So I buckled her in the car, and I just screaming at him, "Stay away from me, stay away from me." And I got in the car and I drove away, and I thought to myself, I need. I mean, I still felt nothing. Like I cannot. I felt nothing at that point. I felt fine. I felt energy, but that was it. And but I knew I needed medical attention after something like that. So I fortunately I didn't live that far from a hospital. So I went to the hospital, and I went into put my daughter in her little foldable um, stroller, and went up into the to the emergency room. And I remember the nurses, they were chit-chatting when I got in there, and I think I kind of brought in a blanket on that mood. As soon as they turned and looked at me, I mean, I just said, that my my husband or whatever had just beat me up, and then I just collapsed at that point, and that was when I started feeling everything. I collapsed on the floor, just kind of draped around my daughter's feet, and the pounding in my head at that point was unreal. I don't, I remember flashes of what happened after that. Like I remember at one point, like I know they shuffled us into a room pretty quickly. Um, them asking me whose blood was on me. I didn't even know there was blood on me. Like it was crazy. They asked me, "Do you want to talk to the police?" And to me, at this point, I'm just following the instructions that are in my head. Like it's not even like I'm making decisions, if that makes any sense. And I just thought this is what you do in a situation like this. And the police happened to be at the hospital for something else, so they came in and there were statements and there was this and there was that and they gave me a CT scan and they checked me out and stuff and of course covered in bruises and I'd lost a lot of my hair had been ripped out and what was left was very matted and I had a really big goose egg on that was growing on one side of my head and yeah and they determined I had a concussion. um, I was fortunate I left there and I had on the Bluetooth in the car between my house and the hospital I had called to my stepmother. My father was out of town and but I called her and she came and then I went back to her place. I was we were very scared. So I parked the car in the garage so that you wouldn't see my car there, but I mean, they literally let me drive away, which is kind of a surprise now, all told. But yeah, it took me a long time to get back to at least to regular life, but all in one night. I did not spend a night in that house again. I had to reestablish life for my daughter and I. I was had some pretty severe trauma after that, obviously. Um, I had dissociative moments, which were moments of disassociation, which was really scary. And the concussion was next level. I was off work for about 6 weeks, and then the following 6 weeks, it was depending on how on the state of how I was with the concussion, I could be at work for an hour, maybe 4 hours, maybe not at all. And since then, I still have persistent symptoms to this day, mainly in the form of the migraines that I kind of always had are way worse than they ever were before. And then a severe photosensitivity. And that's Cole's notes.
Thanks so much, Becky. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. And it's interesting when you talk about obviously the amount of trauma that you went through in that moment, but then also afterwards, like you said, trying to reinvent life for your daughter. Do you think you can speak to, you mentioned a little bit about some of like the physical and like medical attention that you received during that time, but was there any particular support that you received during this time and even now, looking back after that was the most helpful for you?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that at least for me, I was lucky. I had a place to go that night. I didn't have to go to a shelter. I think of how it gives me chills thinking of what it would have been like had I had to go to a shelter where oftentimes you're only able to stay for a couple of weeks if you're lucky, if you can even, if there's room for you there, you and your kids. So immediately I'd say that the fact that I was lucky enough to have that family support was amazing. Um, for me, the concussion was one thing, but the immediate was the mental health at that point, the fear, I was just about killed. Like what do you do with that? And I was seeing a psychologist a couple of times a week, 3 times a week, I think, for quite a while after that. And that definitely helped. Eventually, I saw someone who was more of a cognitive therapy psychologist, and I think that helped, a lot, not just get the story out and kind of speak to it and become more comfortable living with it, but actually finding tools to get around some of the stress that I would have around that. I I had I also one thing that was really helpful was there was a community center type organization that provides a lot of support for uh, women who are victims of violence. in intimate partner violence, and they do group therapy. And lo and behold, by pure chance, they were starting a new group less than a week after this happened, and I found out about it. The police had actually, victim services had recommended it. So I called them up and was able to get in, and that was helpful. I learned a lot about what abuse was. I understood a lot of what was going on in my relationship that I didn't sit right with me, but I never realized was abusive. And now I understood why it didn't sit right. It helped a lot, and it helped, having other women there who understood. Like I didn't have to explain to them why I felt the way I did, and they weren't there to tell me, get over it or something, which I sadly found out is something that a lot of people do kind of have that opinion. Um, and my GP was quite helpful as well. She met with me weekly for probably about 3 months. She booked me at the end of the day and spent a good hour with me and talk about my physical symptoms and but also my my psychological, my mental, my emotional symptoms. She'd even ask me, if I had childcare and stuff, so I was having, support from that perspective. So all of that definitely helped. I think one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is when you get out of a abusive relationship like that, you'd be surprised how much your social circle is really has pressured you to keep you in that relationship, and you end up losing a lot of that, or you have to, because it's the only way to stay out. And it's over the years, as I've met different women, it's surprising how many of us have the story of, what, all within that time period, I lost my two best friends at the same time. Because, for me, in my case, my best friend at the time was the one who, before that night, was trying to convince me I was in an abusive relationship, but she was also the one telling me she wasn't ready for me to get divorced. So, you know what I mean? Like she's trying to, and there was just, I started seeing the parallels and stuff like that. So I'd say that a lot of that group therapy and the psychologist, particularly the cognitive behavioral psychologist for me, helped a lot. I did, after a few months, when the concussion symptoms were just really not going away. It took about 3 months. And then my GP referred me to a neurologist. And she was very kind. She did ran a few tests, I guess, and stuff, but she was the one who referred me to the new psychologist.
Thanks so much, Becky. It sounds like obviously there was not only enduring this much trauma, and this major life shift happens where you kind of have to, you're learning what the abuse is, you're dealing with all the physical symptoms, and then you're dealing also with your social life that may be being uprooted as well. So all of these things are happening all at once. So it's hard to kind of see a lot of clarity during that time. So thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering if maybe out of all of these great resources that you had, if there were any that you wish you had during this time, if you felt like you were missing a piece of support during this.
Yeah, I'd say overall, I had just, I generally had to figure everything out for myself. And I wish there was a better support to be able to help me navigate it all. All at once, I was navigating my own physical and mental health. I had to get my daughter and I into a new home. So we were actually in the process of selling the old house. Um, I had the legal side of things, both the managing and trying to keep up on and understand what was happening on the criminal side, because he was brought up on charges. And then the family side, the family law side. I mean, not to say I didn't have a good lawyer, but there was just a lot to juggle in all of that. It would have been nice if there was some sort of support that just helped me manage it all and know what needed to be done and help me kind of get through it all. I also, ironically enough, I had no idea about the Concussion 360 clinic. I do wish in retrospect that I'd known about it. I would have probably sought some some help there, but I don't know that even my GP knew about it, or she probably would have referred me. So I think it would have been nice um, to have more attention on that. I mean, when this happened, my understanding is you don't do this anymore, but it was still very much so the stay away from screens, dark room, don't move, that kind of instruction. Don't pick anything up, don't, all of that. So I don't know if that affected my recovery or not. I'm not a medical person, but yeah.
That's Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts to that, right? But I think the biggest is just like the overall theme of not having enough information, right? Not knowing, because you're navigating something for the first time.
Yeah.
And so do you think maybe you could speak to how maybe Transcendent as a concussion group can better share resources and information to reach individuals who have sustained intimate partner violence?
Yeah, I mean it's really hard, right? Because essentially you got a group that unless they've reached a shelter or a support group, they're in hiding. They're probably the best way, I can think of is people will secretly Google things. Having those quick escape buttons on those computers, is key so that people don't find out what you've been looking up. Um, and don't see over your shoulder into what you're reading on. Sadly, I think that's part of it. I think also is I would personally like to see more awareness, kind of brought up in health classes and things like that, in high schools and things like that, just to let people know, like if we can teach kids about safe sex, we should be teaching them about what does an abusive relationship look like, and how do you identify that, and what do you do in some of these situations, just to create that general awareness that can hopefully help people get out if they recognize they're in a bad situation, you know.
Yeah, and in this case, knowledge really is power, right? You want to be
Yeah,
teaching others about what a healthy relationship looks like and making healthy choices, but also what harmful relationships look like and how and what to do when you
exactly.
find yourself in one, right?
Exactly. That community group I was part of, so more things like that. Incredible, incredible.
Yeah. And so maybe just on a similar note then, if you had to give advice to someone who might be in a similar situation, which I know is very difficult to do, are there any things that you would tell them or any particular resources you would share?
Um, I believe there's an ABI toolkit right now that's got some helpful resources. There's SOAR. I'm a big fan of SOAR. Um, I would say, be your own advocate. If your GP might just, there's so much to know, I think, my impression as a GP out there. Do your own research and find these things and ask your GP about them. The odds are they're going to support you in trying to get the care that you need. And more than anything, don't forget to put yourself first. I mean, yeah, you got to be there for those kids, but if you can't support yourself, not, like not necessarily put yourself first, but I mean in the sense that, you need to find that time, to support yourself and find your way back in terms of mental health, whatever you need. Um, if there's one thing that this taught me is and to this day is a real sense of priorities. And I tell you, what I thought was a priority before this happened doesn't even come close to what I think a priority is now. At the end of the day, that extra report at work, it can wait. No one's dying if that report isn't done till the end of the week. Um, so cut yourself some slack.
Yeah, that's a great message. Figure aligning your priorities before and after. I can't even imagine how different they must look. Um,
Yeah.
maybe we'll end with one last question. So, which may be a loaded question, but a sort of maybe call to action. So, are there any changes that and I know you maybe have a few. Are there any changes you would like to see from maybe a healthcare perspective or a policymaker perspective to improve care for for people who have experienced concussions due to IPV?
Yeah, I'd say generally two things come to mind for me. One, I really would love to see more general practitioners in emergency rooms and whatnot have the latest and greatest info on how to deal with concussions and be aware of, places like 360 concussion and so that this information can get to the IPV survivors and whatnot. From a policy perspective, I think of the legal side of things, and it's really frustrating. I mean, my ex was charged with assault, and the day after this happened, when I was sitting in the room at Victim Services, and they explained to me that he could not be charged with assault causing bodily harm because it was just a concussion, and there was no proof of that. Like, I had a piece of paper from emergency room with doctor's handwriting all over it saying concussion and whatnot. It's not like it's a broken arm. You got an x-ray for that. So I would really like to see the legal system take this more seriously. I do, in my heart of hearts, believe this was assault causing bodily harm, and he was not charged with that. And then some sort of alignment in the family law system, because fortunately for me, I did not have problems in terms of for some women it can be used against them. A brain injury can be used against them in terms of custody and parenting debates or through the system. But certainly, there's the financial side of things, like, you have to fight. And I still ended up having to pay him because I was lucky enough to have a pension that I had built over the years through my work. I had to pay him $60,000. And I mean, in what world is it fair that at this point in my life, he owns a house and I don't? Because he has this payment from me that, because like, I just don't see that fair, like they've got to do an overhaul of that family law and how things are held out. And in my case, the judge in the criminal case kept holding off sentencing him to pressure me to come to an agreement through family court on a parenting agreement. And it was brutal. And then my own lawyers started pressuring me, and finally I made an agreement. And then the lawyers, the prosecutors said, well, you came to an agreement, so it was all shot. And he got, go take some anger management and stay away from her for a year, and that was it. So no record, no nothing. And then meanwhile, this many years later, I'm on 2 different medications for the migraines, and I still have sometimes some mentally difficult times because of this. So it needs to get better. It needs to get better.
Yeah, I mean, just with everything that you've said today, that it's not just one specific aspect that's causing trouble. It's many different things, and how that impacts everything else, not only with the legal system, for example, but when you were first going through it, how many things were at play, things you had to navigate by yourself. So it's not just one thing, right? That's causing the trouble. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Becky. We really appreciate it, and hopefully, even if this doesn't reach the audience where someone might need to use this information, hopefully it just brings awareness to people that had no idea that sustaining a concussion in this way can be as impactful as it is, can affect so many other areas. So with that, we just really want to thank you from the Transcendent team for sharing your story. So again, I just wanted to thank Becky for taking the time to speak with me and speak to us it was not easy, I know, for her to share that. And I know how valuable it was for me to listen, and I hope for all of you to listen as well. We're going to shift gears a little bit here, and we're going to hear from Karen Mason and Dr. Paul Van Donkler. Karen is the co-founder and executive director of SOAR. She's a passionate advocate for IPV survivors with over 35 years of experience. She works to translate research into practice, support survivor-centered approaches, and advance knowledge about IPV-related brain injuries. Dr. Paul Van Donkler is also the co-founder and scientific advisor of SOAR and a professor at the University of British Columbia. His research focuses on underlying brain dysfunction caused by traumatic brain injuries, with a particular emphasis on IPV-related injuries in women. And if you were listening to Becky's talk, you heard about how much she loves SOAR, as do we. So please enjoy Paul and Karen's story.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us.
We'd like to start by just acknowledging that the work we have done and where we've been located to date has been on the traditional unceded and stolen territory of the Syilx Okanagan people in the named city of Kelowna, British Columbia. But we are currently coming to you from our off-grid cabin, which is on the traditional unceded and stolen territory of the Secwepemc people, not too far from Kamloops, British Columbia. So imagine waking up on the kitchen floor. Your head is pounding. The room is spinning. You struggle to sit up. Everything hurts. And you try to piece together exactly what happened. It had been a particularly rough week. Your husband was in a mood, finding fault with everything you and the kids did. So you sent the kids to Grandma and Grandpa's for a sleepover. They love that. And figured, make a nice meal, get a bottle of wine, have a date night, can kind of get things on track again. So you sat down for dinner and he took a mouthful, slammed his fork down on the table and screamed at you that the food had no flavor. So you jumped up and grabbed the salt from the counter. Before you knew it, he was behind you, grabbed you by the shoulders, spun you around and slammed you against the fridge. And that's the last thing that you remember. And we'd like to think that this sort of scenario is rare, but it's not. That sort of instance rolls out in households across this country every day. Statistically, we know 44% of Canadian women will experience violence at the hands of a partner in their lifetime. But realistically, that number's low because so many women never report, and so many women never recognize that this normal that they're living is actually violence. We also know that most physical intimate partner violence involves blows to the face, head and neck, and strangulation, which is growing increasingly common and can cause brain injury and death within minutes. Research over the last 10 to 15 years indicates as many as 92% of women who experience intimate partner violence will report injuries and challenges that suggest a brain injury. So Paul and I decided, because of all this, to start SOAR, supporting survivors of abuse and brain injury through research. It started as a community-engaged, multidisciplinary research initiative, really a partnership between University of British Columbia, where Paul was and is a professor, and Kelowna Women's Shelter, where at the time I was executive director. Since then, we have become an independent nonprofit agency, registered charity, and we're the only agency in Canada with a singular focus on brain injury from intimate partner violence. SOAR really has three key areas of focus. Explore is where we're looking at how often brain injury is happening in intimate partner violence and how is it affecting survivors, neurocognitively, quality of life, resilience, those sorts of things. Educate is where we want to train anyone who's working with survivors and survivors themselves how to recognize and respond to intimate partner violence, brain injury. And empower is where we're looking to create awareness and support services. Those dedicated support services and pathways of care don't yet exist for survivors of brain injury from intimate partner violence.
So what have we found in the explore phase? Well, we've approached this in two main ways. One is looking at folks acutely, so within 1 week of the incident, and the other is to look at participants chronically, so after 6 months to a year, for example. In the acute phase, we've done a couple different things. One is to do a retrospective chart review of patients from the Embrace Clinic, which is one of Canada's only clinics dedicated solely to supporting survivors of intimate partner violence and sexualized violence. And in this study, we did an analysis of evidence consistent with brain injury from the intake chart narratives and details. And in a second study that just came out with Sandy Schultz's group from Australia, we examined blood biomarkers from emergency department patients who had experienced intimate partner violence-related brain injury. And so what we found is from the Embrace Clinic data, clear direct evidence that strangulation was absolutely occurring in patients coming to the Embrace Clinic, and that strangulation resulted in them being much more likely to report symptoms consistent with brain injury. And that those symptoms were disclosed in around 31% of the cases overall, despite the fact that the original intake form didn't directly ask about brain injury. In the paper that looked at blood biomarkers, we found that there were elevated levels of a protein neurofilament light associated with axonal injury in IPV-BI patients within 72 hours of their injury. So very direct objective evidence that brain injury is very likely happening in this population. In terms of the chronic phase, here we're recruiting clients from various community organizations like Kelowna Women's Shelter, and we're doing initial assessments of psychopathological comorbid factors as well as self-reported history of brain injury resulting from intimate partner violence. And then we bring them up to the lab at UBCO and characterize symptoms consistent with neurocognitive or cerebrovascular dysfunction. And so what we found in these studies is that the majority of participants, around 92%, had experienced at least one episode of IPV resulting in brain injury. The number of symptoms that they reported were greater than what we had observed previously in young athletes who had experienced acute sport-related concussion. In a study in which we had participants perform a fast coordinated movement involving executive function, we found that they performed more poorly the more exposure they'd had to IPV-BI. And in another study where we looked at cerebrovascular physiology, we found evidence of altered cerebral blood flow, again, with more exposure to IPV-BI that was associated with blood biomarkers that were marked for neuroinflammatory processes. So in summary, for the chronic phase, it's clear that these participants have experienced repeated brain injuries that result in chronic symptoms and have long-term consequences.
So that's a quick summary of some of the more recent findings in the explore phase, the research work. In terms of the educate aspect of things, we've developed a number of educational brochures designed specifically to provide information and tools to both survivors and frontline workers. We also created an adapted version of the HELPS brain injury screening tool. The basic adaptation here was to incorporate strangulation, which, as I mentioned, is becoming increasingly common and dangerous. So we wanted to make sure that that was incorporated. And because of that, we also have created a brochure for frontline workers and survivors, specifically on strangulation, which adds additional information and tools. These are all available in French and English for download from our website. We also had the opportunity to work with the BC Injury Research Prevention Unit to develop an online training tool called the Concussion Awareness Training Tool for Women's Support Workers. This is a 30 to 45-minute online course available in French and English and provides a really good introduction to brain injury and intimate partner violence and how to recognize and respond. And this training tool is relevant for anyone working with women. We've also been doing a number of training workshops, half-day and full-day workshops, where we include deep dive content on strangulation and trauma-informed practice and language. We also incorporate some really practical group work and role-playing exercises. And we've worked with clients from a variety of sectors: policing, mental health, gender-based violence, legal, brain injury, really anyone who is working on the front lines and could benefit from learning how to recognize and respond to brain injury and intimate partner violence. In terms of the empower aspect of things, we recently launched an online facilitated peer support group for survivors of brain injury and intimate partner violence. That'll be going for 1 year, and every monthly session includes expert guest speakers on a variety of topics and a session of mindfulness meditation, which we know is really supportive of brain health. We were asked to also share some resources that might be useful for folks on this topic. The Abused and Brain Injured Toolkit was developed by the team at University of Toronto and has incredible research, resources, and tools, both for survivors and frontline workers. Our friends at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network created their own assessment tool called the CHATS tool, which you can download for free. And we highly recommend this book, No Visible Bruises. It's an excellent book on intimate partner violence, and it includes information on brain injury. Other resources nationally are Women's Shelters Canada, Shelter Safe, Brain Injury Canada, and globally, the Enigma Consortium has a global knowledge exchange network. Great thing to join if you're interested in connecting with other experts and learning more about this topic. And Pink Concussions has a task force on partner-inflicted brain injury and also runs a number of online support groups for women who've experienced brain injury. So that's a great resource for survivors and for service providers to share with their clients.
So we'd like to thank the funding that we've been able to receive both through UBC and SOAR to support the work that's being done, and a special shout out to the trainees who've worked with me to do a lot of the work that we presented today.
And this is how to reach us and how to follow SOAR on social media. We're very active on social media, and we love to connect with our followers. Thanks so much, and we look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you so much, Karen and Paul, who are with us. They're in the Zoom room right now. Before we get to our Q&A panel, we're going to hear from one of our own Transcendent team members. So now you heard from Becky's story, heard from Karen and Paul with some interesting research as well as helpful resources. And we're excited to introduce Dr. Jennifer Dawson, who is a research associate at the CHIO Research Institute and guideline developer for the Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion, supporting evidence-based concussion care and prevention. She leads patient engagement for the Transcendent Concussion Research Program, fosters community partnerships, and speaks internationally on concussion recovery. So we'll be hearing from Dr. Dawson right now.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Jenny Dawson, and I am a research associate at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, based out of Ottawa, Canada. It's an absolute privilege to be here today, joined by our three distinguished guests. At CHIO, my work focuses on collaborating with brain injury experts from across North America to create tools and resources that are grounded in the latest evidence. These are designed not just for healthcare professionals, but for everyone. Social workers, educators, caregivers, anyone who plays a role in helping people recover and thrive after an injury. Last year, a few experts approached me with an important concern. There was a critical gap in clinical guidelines for professionals working with adolescents facing gender-based violence. These young people often face unique and complex challenges, and we realized their needs weren't being addressed in the existing guidelines. We have now worked with these experts to create a new resource that will begin to fill this gap. Today, I'm proud to share the work of these experts with you. These tools can be used by all of us to build a community of support and help everyone recognize, respond to, and provide the best possible care for suspected concussions in adolescents at risk of gender-based violence. So let's dive into my slides. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Roger Zemek, a pediatric emergency physician from CHIO here in Ottawa, and Dr. Nick Reed, an occupational therapist and a knowledge translation professional from the University of Toronto, for their collaboration on the Living Guideline. How do you access these resources? Easiest way is to type in pedsconcussion.com in your web browser. I've also included a QR code here for you to access more information. Before I begin going through the supplement, I wanted to highlight the importance that all of us can play in our communities for keeping people safe after a suspected concussion. While a formal diagnosis of concussion needs to be made by a medical assessment, by a physician or a nurse practitioner, All of us play a very important role in recognizing concussion and keeping people safe until they can get in to see their doctor. How do we do this? The tool that we recommend is called the Concussion Recognition Tool 6, the CRT6. It was developed by the Concussion in Sport group, and the 6th version was published in 2023. You can get to it by Googling CRT6. I've also added the QR code here for a direct link to the PDF. I'm not going to go through the CRT6 stepwise. However, it's an excellent tool to have in your first aid kit. If you're a coach, put it in your ball bag, trainer, anyone who's helping people who may have had a suspected concussion or are at risk of being hit to the head or having an impact to their body. This tool takes the guesswork out of whether or not you need to keep that person safe and get them to their doctor after a hit. I also wanted to highlight that in all cases of suspected concussion, it's our job as community members and supporters to make sure that person is in a safe environment where they're not going to get hit in the head again or fall while they're waiting for their initial medical assessment. And they do need to undergo that assessment as soon as possible to ensure they have a full differential diagnosis and we can start getting them on the road to recovery as soon as possible. I talked a little bit in my introduction about the new tool we've developed at CHIO for helping to support patients who may have suspected concussion from an IPV. You can access that on the PEDS Concussion website under special considerations. That link brings you directly to the tool. It is a 3-page PDF that was written by and led by Dr. Mike Ellis and Dr. Michelle Ward. We also had support from Karen and Paul on this call and many other collaborators. The tool gives medical experts an overview of different types of cranial and extracranial injuries that can result from intimate partner violence, and also goes through some special considerations from providing the initial medical assessment, follow-up, and multidisciplinary management for helping to support people who may have an IPV-related head and neck injury. How are we doing with this tool? It was released in March 2024, and we've had quite a global reach. We have guideline users from around the world, approximately 60% from Canada, just over 40% from the US, and individuals from over 135 other countries have accessed this resource over the past year. So once again, here's our QR code, and I encourage you to check it out. And please do reach out if you have any other ideas of how we can work together to help people recover from concussion. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dawson. So now's the exciting part of our session. We'll be opening it up for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we will spotlight our speakers. Hi, Karen. Hi, Paul. Nice to see you both. And I will also spotlight Becky as well. And maybe what we'll do is we'll see if there's any questions coming up in the question and answer box. So the first one, and this is one that was asked primarily from the REDCap survey. So we have a lot of people here who are non-medical professionals. So people that, I know there's people on this call today that are from law and social work. And so what would you recommend for them to engage with the people that may be engaging with people with who have experienced intimate partner violence as well as concussion?
Yeah, well, we've been doing a lot of work with folks from various groups. In fact, I just spent the afternoon with a bunch of legal aid workers in BC yesterday. So this is a good question because we often get asked, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't diagnose someone, but I know I'm working with these survivors, so how can I support them? So we find that the Adapted Helps tool is a great way to guide a conversation for folks working on the front lines. If they're wondering if someone they're working with may have been concussed or at risk of concussion, they can use the Helps tool as a conversation, not as a formal assessment, to sort of guide that thread of conversation and see if this person may have experienced concussion. We just really recommend that if you're working with a survivor of physical violence, you're probably safe to assume they may have experienced one or more head injuries. And therefore, you can put tools into play like making sure you don't give them too much computer work to do, having them repeat information back to you so you know they've understood what you're saying and what you need from them. We recommend even keeping like a supply of cheap sunglasses or baseball hats or earplugs around, because if people are having sensitivity to noise or light, those sorts of tools can help. Asking what their comfort level is and maybe moving to a quieter location or a place that's not as brightly lit. Things like that, just that frontline workers of any sort can keep in mind in order to be brain injury informed as well as trauma informed when they're supporting folks. And then also, you know, if it's clear and they have spoken about that head injury may have happened, referring them to resources and brochures. We shared some of them, but there's lots out there, and a lot of stuff that's really accessible for survivors and helpful for them too.
Thank you so much, Karen. Becky, I'm wondering if we can hear from you on this as well. So from a survivor side, how would you respond to that? So thinking about perhaps some of the people that you worked with in the law offices, some of the other, you mentioned some cognitive behavioral therapists. Is there anything that you would recommend how to support somebody who's sustained a concussion from IPV?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything Karen said. I'd say in those early days, where possible, one of the things that helped was when, particularly in dealing with police, it helped when I had someone with me. So the day after it happened, when I went to victim services, I had someone who came with me because there was no way I was going to remember or take in anything that they said. The only way I remember any of it was because my friend was with me and took notes. A couple of days later, when I had to go back and had the galling experience of having to be stripped down and photographed, you know, and they do wait a few days to make sure those bruises come out. It's, you know, it's again to make sure that they tell you bring someone with you if you can, and kind of be open to that, be sensitive to that. I think that's a big part of it. And then the other thing that comes to mind too is, you know, for me, I was fortunate that I was away. I managed on getting away that night, but not every woman does. And you would be surprised the kind of information. Closed doors do not mean closed ears, and do not assume they're going to share one iota of any kind of information with you if you are in their house, even if he is in the other room, or anything like that. There's going to be a lot of fear there, and it's not that they don't want to address it, but there's going to be fear of things being overheard and retaliation. And even if they are out, retaliation against kids, against pets, against whatever it could be, yeah. So just to be sensitive to that as well.
Thank you so much, Becky. That's so helpful. I'm wondering if we can turn maybe to a little bit of the research side. So maybe, Paul, we can hear from you as well as Jennifer. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the cross collaboration that you went through to create the IPV module and the concussion guidelines, and who are the people that you're bringing into those conversations?
Paul, would you like to go first? Or would you like me to start it off? I don't mind.
Go for it.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. So the basis of the work on the guideline work is that we have an expert team of 48 experts from across North America. And the way us guideline developers work is we bring the evidence together, we bring the experts together, and we build these clinical recommendations that are based both on evidence, and we grade them based on evidence and also on expert opinion. And so this is where we felt it was not only important to create a supplement, but also to have this supplement as a place that we can show we really need more research, and a lot of what we're recommending at this point is expert opinion. So trying to make sure we improve awareness and encourage more researchers to help generate some and build the evidence base so we can really truly be helping everyone that we need and want to help. So this supplement was first drafted by a group of experts. In this case, we were able to leverage some of the excellent work from SOAR. As I mentioned, it was led by Dr. Michael Ellis and Dr. Michelle Ward, who are two clinician researchers who have a vast amount of experience, but the collaborators are too many to list. And once we had the draft, I then had the responsibility of presenting the work to our team of 48 experts who reviewed and had an opportunity to weigh in and essentially vote. And we used consensus voting to make sure that the majority of our experts agree before we go and share a supplement that can essentially improve, hopefully, and change how we're treating people after a concussion. And the neat thing about that is, as soon as we have reached that critical vote, we can then share it. So it means that evidence can get into practice very, very quickly, and we can start to spread the word. And the next step, as I mentioned, is to keep improving awareness, identify those gaps, and to try to encourage funders, policymakers, and researchers to all work together and fill those gaps.
Yeah, and I could just add that our main contribution was through Mike Ellis, who's one of the only physicians in Canada that's working directly on brain injury from intimate partner violence. And I think if he was on the call, he would express kind of the frustration of running into barriers in terms of treating this population and appropriately referring them to better supports. And so part of the work that we're interested in expanding upon is around developing clinical practice guidelines for this population and raising knowledge and awareness amongst healthcare workers so that they're in a better position and have better tools at their disposal to help folks who are experiencing this.
Absolutely. I think something that's really great that's come out of this session today is all of the resources you shared and the education as well. And we had a couple of questions in the chat about if the resources will be made available. And so we'll share all of that with you after this session as well. So no need to worry about that, about writing anything down. We will send that all to you. I'm wondering, so Becky mentioned in her talk a little bit about not being seen as a survivor of abuse because of the concussion that she sustained. And a question that we had that came through on the red cap was, how can we best support people that who have experienced a concussion as a result of intimate partner violence, but perhaps they're not formally diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury? So how can you maybe speak a little bit to how to best support these people?
You want to speak to the diagnosis?
Yeah, so the diagnosis part is a challenge, and I think Becky's explanation of her experience, even when it seems really, really obvious and clear, it still might fall through the cracks, and that's incredibly unfortunate. Kind of on the other extreme end of this is, the kind of chronic effects of this. So, intimate partner violence is usually cyclical and repetitive, and sometimes it can go over months or years. And so you get this kind of chronic exposure to head impacts and non-fatal strangulation. In many ways, it's like, a lot of the research and clinical work that's done on retired collision sport athletes who spent 20 or 30 years participating in a sport where they were receiving head impacts on a regular basis and then suffering the, chronic consequences of that. And so there's definitely, a large proportion of mainly women out there who've gone through these kind of cyclical, repetitive experiences that are probably suffering the chronic effects of brain injury. And that's part of the research that we're doing, is getting at that. But from a clinical perspective, it gets even more messy because sometimes these are things that happened 5-10 years ago, and yet they're still, feeling the effects of it. And so how can that more nuanced conversation and supports, be put in place such that we're also finding ways to help folks that are in those more chronic phases of feeling the effects of this.
Right, like Becky, who shared that she still is dealing with migraines and other issues that absolutely are related to those assaults. And the issue, of course, with diagnosis is a survivor can report the mechanism of injury, but the only witness may or may not have been children. It's not like a sports event where everyone sees what happens and everyone says, "Yep, pretty sure somebody just got a concussion." And we have those really established response systems and pathways of care, which don't yet exist. The key for survivors, and the key piece here is trauma-informed practice. We have found, sure, we could send a survivor of brain injury from intimate partner violence to an expert concussion clinician. But if that person has no deep knowledge of the nuance and complexity of intimate partner violence and the dynamics of that coercive control relationship, they're probably not going to provide appropriate support, and that woman may not go back. So that's really a key piece of what's missing in kind of the education and awareness right now.
Thank you.
Highlighting, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jenny. Yep.
Well, I just wanted to say, based on Karen and Paul's comments, is we have to remember that concussion really is a bit of an invisible illness. We can't see anything on an MRI or a CT scan, yet what people experiencing is truly a brain injury. And that can be really frustrating. At this time, we don't have any blood biomarkers that can tell you whether you have a concussion or whether you've healed. We also don't have any saliva markers or really that many tests that can definitively say yes or no, you have a concussion. We have to do a full differential diagnosis. Now, there's new diagnostic criteria that was just released this past year, and that is certainly helping in the emergency department, for example. But that's also why the work we're doing at CHIO through the Transcendent Concussion Research is so exciting, because we're trying to take patients from all different types of mechanisms of injury, all different ages, and doing research to try to improve and hopefully identify those biomarkers, whether it be through advanced neuroimaging, blood tests, saliva biomarkers, and also all different types of tests where we can be able to start to learn and detect concussion in a way that hopefully we can take some of the diagnosing guesswork out and definitively say this person has a concussion. I fortunately, I have worked with Becky through some of these projects, and it always hits really hard home when she uses the example of the broken arm and how we can take an x-ray and we can see that the arm is broken, and how that person is treated differently than someone who has the invisible injury of a concussion. Bones, as we know, for most people heal fairly quickly. Brains, although we are really improving in our treatment, we're learning a lot, but some people can have very long and lasting symptoms. So it doesn't seem right that it should be treated so differently.
I agree. Sorry, I was just going to chime in too with, I agree. And yeah, that is something I say a lot about the comparison, that it's easier to get an assault causing bodily harm charge with a broken arm than it is with a head injury, even though the impact is so different. I think one thing when it comes to, if I think of the main difference, with a concussion from IPV versus a concussion from another source, and this isn't, I mean, maybe there'll be other, maybe it would be different if it was a concussion from a car accident or something else that was traumatic, but it's that trauma piece. It's that crossroads between the mental health recovery. That's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about those dissociative moments. Every single step of the day is a challenge, and it is full of fear. And you layer on top of that the brain injury, and it's brutal. It's very, very difficult. And that's kind of the piece that I just, if people can remember that and just have that extra sensitivity, that would be the big piece for me.
Thanks so much, Becky. You took the words out of my mouth. I wanted you to leave maybe the listeners with something. And so thank you for sharing that. I want us to be mindful of the time. I see that we're past the hour, so I will end the webinar here. But I again wanted to thank our speakers today. I have learned so much over the course of this month about IPV and concussion, and I appreciate all the work that you all do. And Becky for being an outstanding advocate for women and people who may be scared to share their experiences. So thank you for doing that for us. And like I mentioned, all of the resources will be shared afterwards with a small survey, so you will get all of that information. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.